Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I want to talk to you a little bit about a fearful avoidant attachment style individual and having parents or a parent or a caregiver in general who is going through addiction. So, before I dive into all of this, please know that this is one of the most important features that actually affects fearful avoidant attachment styles. Of course, this is definitely not the only reason somebody can become fearful avoidant in terms of their attachment style. And there can be individuals who are a little bit more anxious if they're not exposed to a lot of a parent's addiction, and if the parent isn't like deeply heavily addicted to something, but they're sort of just this disconnect, because the parent is not emotionally available when they're high, when they're not sober, etc. But when we're talking about like real intense addiction, you are almost always going to get the output of having a fearful avoidant attachment style individual as a byproduct. And I really want to discuss in this video a little bit about why that is, about the importance of recognizing the attachment strategy that the fearful avoidant derives from going through some of their childhood experiences, and then what we can do in terms of how to overcome this major challenge. So first and foremost, this was a question asked by somebody in our community, and it essentially talked about going through the experience of feeling like this person's mom didn't love me enough to quit the addiction to alcohol. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen individuals go through this. And so we're going to just talk a little bit about why. First thing I want you to know is that fearful avoidant attachment style is sometimes referred to as the disorganized attachment style or the anxious avoidant attachment style. And those are actually both like very well descriptive names for, that's not really a sentence, but those are both very well chosen names for the fearful avoidant. And because the fearful avoidant goes from their anxious to avoidant side. So anxious avoidant is a great term. And I especially like the term disorganized because it's really referencing the fact that the fearful avoidant attachment style individual doesn't have an organized strategy for how to attach to somebody else. So I want you to imagine, for example, that you grow up in a household where there is no consistency whatsoever because you have at least one caregiver who's an alcoholic. What is the byproduct of that? Well, you grow up in that household, and some days, in this person's example, some days mom is sober and she's nice. Some days mom, you can't tell if she's sober or not. Some days mom is drinking and she's really warm and extra loving. Other days mom is drinking and she's really mean and harsh and critical. Other days mom is getting sober and going through withdrawals and a hangover and she's really mean. And so there's no consistency about mom, which means there's no consistency in how you can attach to mom. And that will shatter and fragment a person's internal trust baseline. And the reason for this is if we don't learn that we can trust our caregivers in a healthy way, we project that, and that becomes our worldview of how we can trust and interact with other people. And so this is a very common experience that creates fearful avoidant, aka disorganized attachment, because there's no organized attachment strategy. Basically, what the fearful avoidant learns to do is instead become really hypervigilant and become really good at picking up on human behavior, reading between the lines, social cues, all these different things, which can be a superpower in some ways. But the downside is it can lead to a lot of narratives we create. It can lead to a lot of, oh my goodness, I just noticed an incongruency. And now that I see an incongruency in somebody's behavior, I can't trust them. It must be this thing, this thing. It must be that I'm not good enough. They're leaving me. They're betraying me, these sorts of things. And the mind wants to fill in the blanks with the hypothetical worst case scenario so it can know all the bad things that can go wrong and protect itself in advance. So it creates like this really interesting dynamic. Now, what do we do about it? We really work to repair our internal trust baseline. We really work to dump out all of the painful stories we have about trust and how we can't trust people. And we really work to show up and reprogram those stories. I have a whole course about this in so much detail. And then the other really important component in here is learning to show up in the relationship to ourselves where we don't betray our own trust. And that means speaking up for your needs, setting your boundaries, being there for yourself and your feelings. It means really like developing a relationship and also doing what we say we're going to do in the relationship to ourselves, congruency within relationship to self. also produces self-trust. So those are important factors. And all of this together really helps to repair that internal trust baseline. When it comes to this more specific component of this individual's question, they said, you know, I have a healthier relationship with my mom now, and has figured out emotional boundaries, which is amazing, but they still get sad when this idea is brought up and this story that comes up, which is believing that my mom didn't love me enough to quit her addiction. And this is something that almost every child of an addict goes through, this belief that my parent didn't love me enough. And it's a narrative that we really, really, really have to question, because this is where trauma gets sort of twofold, becomes like a twofold trauma. Is it's already traumatic enough that mom was an addict, and then to make it mean that we weren't loved enough, we just doubled up that trauma to make it mean that we weren't lovable enough in some form, or good enough in some way, or perfect enough for the parent to quit. We just took something already traumatic and it became way bigger. Now, the mind naturally does this, right? And the mind naturally does this because it wants to find that context. It wants to know what's going on. It wants to buffer itself out by giving meaning to things and understanding things and putting them in boxes and sort of compartmentalizing the ideas we form around things. It's a subconscious strategy for safety, quite honestly. But I can tell you, as somebody who's worked with many children of addicts, but also many addicts, and somebody who struggled in my very late teens and or my very early 20s and mid to late teens, I struggled with addiction. That it has nothing to do with how much you love somebody. It has nothing to do with it at all. What it has to do with is this cycle that you're completely consumed by, that your subconscious mind is just so invested in, and you don't have control. It's like that person who's struggling is the person who's has completely lost agency over the relationship to themselves. And part of what happens is whenever we have unresolved pain or suffering at the subconscious level because of earlier traumas that we went through, let's say as the addict, that person and how our mind is wired, it's wired to avoid pain. And how do we avoid pain? Often through seeking pleasure. And then if we're carrying a ton of subconscious pain that's not resolved, and then we find a strategy to numb or alleviate some of that pain, then because the mind is always working to equilibrate, it's going to go out of its way to dive down that rabbit hole and grab everything it can to try to soothe itself. And there isn't a part where, it's about, oh, if I loved a child more, if I was able to. And I know we hear stories about people who sober up um, because they had children and things like that. And that's wonderful. But I can tell you with 100% certainty, it's like we talk about this. The issue isn't the issue with addiction. It's not the alcohol going down mom's trachea and esophagus like at night while she's sleeping. Like, she's reaching for that because she has all this unresolved trauma. And the biggest component that I want you to understand as the person asking this question, or if you are the child of a parent who went through addiction, is that the subconscious mind, and research has conclusively proven this, cannot outwill or overpower the conscious mind. So when I talk about how we lose our sense of agency or autonomy over relationship to self, what that actually is that the subconscious needs to avoid pain, and the programs and strategies that have been working to do so are so deeply wired in and so all consuming, and they are so deeply programmed into the subconscious, which will always outwill and overpower. And that's where we lose control when going through an addiction, is we lose control to our own subconscious, which has deep programs and very strong emotional associations to turning to the positives, to turn to the alcohol, to turn to the substance, to turn to whatever it might be. And if that was something that originally was really nice for the first year, for example, that a parent started drinking alcohol, all these positive emotional associations are built in and programmed to alcohol and how it relieves the pain. And then the subconscious mind, whenever it feels pain, it trips this wire that says, go to the alcohol, go to that thing. And the conscious mind can try, but unless we actually go in and work to reprogram the painful components behind that addiction, that, the roots of it, which is, the problem isn't the problem, it's the trauma, the unresolved traumas from the past that cause this need to equilibrate the pain. That's the root of the problem. Unless we resolve that, it doesn't matter how much you love children. It doesn't matter how much. It's, do you have the proper tools? Do you know what's going on? Are you doing the work on the underlying trauma? And then can you do the reprogramming work to actually develop healthier coping mechanisms and reprogram these new updated strategies of relieving yourself from pain, and deprogram and start to understand how much pain is actually coming with those original strategies of drinking the alcohol or smoking the thing or whatever it might be. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense. I hope this is a really important message for individuals who've been through this, and who have parents or loved ones, children, siblings, anything who have gone through addiction. Definitely a really important topic to discuss. And if you guys ever want to hear more about this stuff, please let me know. Please let me know in the comments below. And this individual also says, is it normal to feel emotional from these painful past experiences? Yes. And it's okay to feel a little bit of emotion because that was a hard time, and to honor that. But if we're feeling suffering still, like getting teary and really sad, it means that that story is still alive a little bit within you. And it's really important to question it, to work to equilibrate it, to look at how mom did love you, but mom was in so much pain. Mom didn't have the tools. These programs got so deeply wired in. Mom wasn't capable of loving in a healthy way, though she very much loved. Okay. And so these are really important equilibrators and things to shift and reposition. So hopefully this makes so much sense. What a beautiful share and question. Thank you. Please like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next video.